Well, hello. I'm back with another placeholder rant, and I just want to talk about the measles and the measles vaccine in the context of another thing that I keep railing against, and this is this tendency for us to fall back on superficial sorts of binary thinking. Um, in a philosophy audiobook I've been listening to, I was happy to see that person talking about this is an organic feature. It's realized in the fact that we actually have two centers of consciousness that are in perpetual communication, but can be argued to represent different people that live inside you at the scale of being an overriding or an emergent agent. So while you have this conscious uh, belief, feeling behind your eyes that there's a you looking out, well, that's just conditioned too, because when there was a time when they thought consciousness, the seat of consciousness was the heart, do they see themselves as seeing from their hearts? Do they mean that any metaphorically more metaphorically or literally? And there's a big problem with the words we use here and how we use them. Sometimes when we say that we're seeing, we literally mean perceiving through the optical instruments called the eye, but it's really the eye brain, right? All our sensory distal sensory mechanisms are all wired into the brain. So there is no sensing with eyes. It's sensing with the eye brain. So the greater problem with this, so it seems that for oppositional, we have to take up these oppositional concepts: good, bad, right, wrong, up, down, left, right, inside, outside, within, without, before, after, and on they go. And we tend to, when we have deemed some pair of opposites now some paradefinitional orbit, because to say what good is as much to say that it's not bad, and to say what bad is to say that it's not good. So they are co-definitions. You can't understand an opposite only in terms of the positive definition of its opposite. You can't understand light by light alone. You understand light as it presents itself to us, as it manifests to us uh, in electromagnetic radiation, which we don't see. So by the light, we come to see objects. So the other problem with this need to start with these paraconcepts, these co-orbiting anti-concepts, we should think of them as a pair. But what we tend to do in social, in instances of accruing social power, which we like to call getting to the truth, but that's never what we're doing. We're never getting to the truth of anything, but which ape gets to say what's true. I think the average person is far less capable of understanding truth on any terms but social dominance, because they don't understand the things that I'm going to say. So anybody who's refusing to take these vaccines or trivializing the consequences of people getting the measles, particularly children, is an idiot. Now you're not an idiot for being an objector, for being skeptical, because you should be, and that's part of the story I'm going to tell today. Because what's buried here in the forwarding of vaccines in this culture of anti-intellectualism that would take some false beliefs that were perpetuated by this asshole Andrew Wakefield, and then despite of the fact that that's been all completely debunked and he's been fired from all his jobs, that people still believe that. They still took that. So there was some underlying suspicion, paranoia that was clearly latching on to the first case of public evidence, false though it may be. So part of what I want to look at here is I want to look at the factual and the bionormative to recontextualize these diseases in the context of agriculture and how microorganisms might have functioned prior to our breaking out of our flat groups and forming these complex hierarchical societies and the complex ape sociality that comes from that on the one good side came to understand the causes of disease and to create these tools to mitigate the worst outcomes of these diseases. But we're already forgetting that the outcomes that we solved with technology had already been worsened by other technology, so that there are layers we have to untangle here if we're going to understand why we did what we did and why we need to keep doing that, but to also understand why there might be this reactionary skepticism and paranoia, because on the same terms, a lot of people, particularly if they don't understand how technology works, can still see all the harms. So it's not as simple as vaccine good, no vaccine bad, or getting sick bad, not getting sick good. So this binary thinking problem, the divide and conquer problem, is riddled with biases. It's actually not inferential or evidenced at all. It is a bare definitional capacity. We cannot begin to behave in culture through language until we've named all the things we would wish to embed in that culture. There is a sense in which, for us, unnamed things do not exist. At least they don't exist in culture. So that was a bit of a mess, a little bit of editing there. Lost my thread, as I always do. So let's take a step back and let's ask some questions. Now, I have a degree in science, and I continue to educate myself in domains of scientific and philosophical inquiry that lie outside of those which define my initial project. But of course, as the applications and insights my project aims to promote, a new research project, as those developed and crystallized, I could see that the work and the insights would bear on other domains of knowledge that I'm not an expert in, and so it behooved me to continue to work in areas of scientific and other expertise outside of my primary domain. And so I'm not looking up facts here. I'm not doing a script. I'm probably going to get a lot of this wrong. Some of this is really old information in my head. Some of it comes from new things and new books. Like, we're really starting to understand what has gone on with the human exodus out of Africa, and how spontaneous that was, and how narrow a population we went through. But don't forget the root genetic, the very complex and very diverse genes of indigenous Africans, whose origins are from populations that had always lived in Africa. Like, they're always moving around in Africa, but before this exodus, before this, it's 50,000, 80,000. There's a lot of confusion here because the evidence doesn't line up. So for some, it's further back, 80,000. The Ice Age, the access to being able to roam as a hunter gatherer into unknown environments is highly dependent on the state of the climate. So there are some inconsistencies there. But humans were very isolationist and in Africa. In spite of all that, that's why there's still all this genetic diversity, because whatever compelled this need to cover the planet. And the other thing that's important to understand is that agriculture appeared all over the planet in different places, and only after we covered all the earth. Like it just it, it, it it's an emergence. It seems that these things we're part of these emergent material bionormative cultural unfoldings, and we're not in control. We're kind of in the moment, and then new impulses and new genetic potentials become opened up, often by populations being diminished in size and facing survival challenges. But if they don't, they're not made extinct locally or for the whole species. Sometimes getting through those bottlenecks will drive radical tips and be in genotypes and phenotypes. So clearly, that last exodus out of Africa marked a new phase in human behavior. This exploration, domination. Is it a running away or is it a running towards? Is it the improvement of our consciousness, or is it the embedding and furthering of whatever madness in us we acquire from whatever madness is in existence? Because, like I say, if we're crazy, then the universe is crazy. So what would life have been like for those humans in Africa, but also those ones who start moving around the rest of the world? They're going to not colonize, but I can't, emigrate. You see, these aren't my areas of specialty. They're going to go everywhere, to the Polynesian islands. Like, I mean, no humans today would undertake those sorts of journeys with the limited technologies and risks. Something was clearly driving humans on this expansionary bent, let's say. So what would have it been? Well, there wouldn't have been endemics. Now, would there have been, what are we going to say? I don't want to call them diseases, but did people suffer from infections caused by microorganisms that cause their immune systems to create symptoms that could have temporarily sickened them or killed them? Sure. But we're not talking about endemics or pandemics in the modern form, because they did not exist. Now, people did get cavities, not as many, mostly because they didn't have advanced cooking and food preparation before agriculture, before culture. They're eating a lot of unprocessed foods. They're eating all of the food. They're eating and you see an animal, you give them a piece of food, they'll eat it all, the bones, the skin. That's how it works. That's why we had such powerful immune systems, or had to develop them, because as omnivores, not as predators, we had to eat what we what we could eat when we could find it in any condition. So that would include rotting fruit and vegetable. I think that's how we developed, co-evolved with our gut bacteria that actually do as much to keep us healthy if we're feeding the right bacteria. So you see all of these downstream issues post vaccines, post the microorganism theory of disease causation, bury the past, and they bury and deny the animal behaviors that are still driving us, that have only been tempered by these cultural conditionings. Things like, don't put your elbows on the table. What does that have to do with being nourished and not getting sick? So we've got a lot of norms and taboos that did turn out to be effective to reducing disease. So we can look at kosher, which pork is a very common source of trichinosis and other diseases. So when we started keeping or hunting these animals, we became subject to those things. We didn't know. But then if somebody prepared a pig in the way and nobody got sick. And somebody's like, hey, what did you do? Nobody got sick. People usually get sick when we eat this pork. And boy, that sucks, but we need to eat. What did you do? Well, I did this. And this is this post hoc, causation as correlation. This is the magical thinking starts. So we start adapting these taboos and behaviors about how we eat, and some of those things do effectively reduce disease. Like a lot of animals eat their poo, but you don't let human children eat their poo, but they will. They'll eat anything if you let them. It's part of your job as a parent is to smack the eating shit out of them. So let's not forget that. And so we didn't have sugar, so we didn't have caries, but we would wear our teeth down because we didn't cook. We didn't know food preparation. We weren't cultivating crops to make them more flesh, like less fibrous and with more of the carbohydrate or the fruit or the sugar, right? So we're a long way from that. And so are we hunting that 80,000 years ago? Absolutely. Would we be animal husbandry? Would we be keep, because it seems like sheep and goats, but before sheep and goats, gazelle? I was looking a little bit at the births of this, so I'm not quite sure when we start animal husbandry, but obviously when we start agriculture on the scale that both allows to them to emerge, but also is the self-sustaining thing, like more comprehensive and state-controlled forms of agriculture uh, are going to emerge with city-states. Like they're going to feed back, and I mean, once they're in, they're in, because as we know, you get more calories out of agriculture to start, but the quality of the diet goes down. It does allow you to keep more people, and then these people can be redeployed. So we did pay a price to create the administrative complexities and infrastructure to allow us to properly exploit more informal ways of like having a garden or encouraging certain plants to grow or burning, right? This what's this word shit? I looked it up yesterday. This thing, no, not trepanning is the thing where you cut a hole in your head. Anyways, it doesn't matter. There's a word for that kind of uh, uh, agriculture, right? Slash and burn agriculture. It's not quite on the industrial side. So this is what I'm talking about. Before we got into this city state driven industrial, standardized craft skills, economy, profit, trade, all of this modern stuff, which is really only barely 10,000 years old, and really written language is only 6,000 years old. We're still not creating the modern disease risks. But of course, by the time we get to city states, which only happens after that last group leaves Africa through a very narrow bottleneck of population, maybe 1,000 to 9,000 humans, that clearly, and then trying to survive another ice age up in the north of Europe, right? And this is where the whiteness comes from. But let's not forget, 1,500 years ago, there were no white people, they were all brown. So if you think that there were white people, planning to dominate the world when they left Africa, hey, those people didn't exist 10,000 years ago because most humans had brown skin still. What it took was establishing cultures with technology, with agriculture, with domestication of animals, to then allow them to live in these harsher climates, because it's a lot easier to survive a famine in a jungle than it is, well, there won't be a famine in the jungle, right? That's the thing. And that's where we came from. And a lot of what pushed us out was the Great Rift opening, the continent drying, and this rich jungle, which Homo found its first home, little undifferentiated proboscideans and whatnot, was in the trees in the jungle. And it was only the shifts in climate that pushed these clever monkeys with their prehensile, I guess that's the word, grasping, out of the trees and into the predator game, right? And I've talked in other videos how we were poorly set to become a top predator because we don't function like the other top predators. We invert everything and ruin it. So, anyways, there's no endemics. There's no animal husbandry on a scale that would drive these modern diseases. Most of the diseases we suffer from now are an accident of agriculture and animal husbandry. Like one of the things that has to happen here is, look, if you're going to hate bacteria, you might as well hate yourself. This paranoia and fear over disease is furthered by ignorance, and it fits right in with the capitalist pipe dream. Create fake needs as wants by creating problems that don't need to exist in the first place, and then sell stupid people who can't proact to prevent those things from happening to buy these magic bullet solutions. So what percentage of medicine is a magic bullet? If it works like the placebo. Well, it's pretty high, I would think. And it gets worse as you get into diet and supplements, which are mostly unnecessary. Like, it's so simple. Eat real food. Make it yourself. Share it. Don't eat ultra-processed food. And stay away from drugs and alcohol and drink water. Like, fuck. It's not complicated. So there is this core, though, of medicine. And that's the thing I'm finally going to talk about here. So as we a civilization expands. So now we're skipping from 10,000 years, and we're going to the birthplace of Western civilization. So we're well into language. We're into we got all the ideologies, the political ideas, and everything, and we've got ancient but still industrial scale agriculture and animal husbandry. We've domesticated and interbred crops and animals towards our ideal eating outcomes, also to perpetuate the emergent structures of mostly male ape dominance that are plaguing us still. And this gets normalized. This is just the thing, that there are these diseases. People know about them. They have names like consumption, whatever. And people just take them as a matter of course. They don't really know what causes them. This plays into the idea of gods and rituals and bleeding and all this shit, but we really don't have a clue. And so humans just lived like that. And in the Middle Ages, a third of Europe was wiped out by the bubonic plague, and that microorganism, they think, came out of the Caucasus Mountains. So when you hear of Caucasian, these are the Russian steppes, a ridge, a barren plains of rocks and whatnot. The thing that stopped Genghis Khan from destroying Europe and could have changed the history of the world is there are these mountains and these plains and ridges, and it's just a hostile place, very cold in the winter, not good soil, and on it goes. But most of these diseases are caused by us living in close quarters with animals, and of course our own unsanitary conditions. Now, the interesting thing is there's very few organisms that go from species to species universally. Like, so even with dogs, there's a few things you can get worms from dogs. Oh, humans used to live with worms their whole fucking lives, so these were piecemeal. These are not the problem that only vaccines could have addressed. You see, I'm trying to get the point here that maybe some of the concern, the paranoia, the skepticism, the dumbness around vaccines is because people don't understand we're in a if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound situation, and have been for 300 or 400 years. It's like when I say to people, food banks shouldn't exist. people say, well, we got to have food banks. People will starve. And I'm like, listen, you moron. I didn't say shut all food banks down now. So I think that's the ignorant, stupid people who just have to pick a side because they know they don't know and they don't want to seem to not know and they got to maintain their social power because they're going to look at some stupid ape they think is pretty or better than them to decide whether vaccines are good and bad. It's idiotic. So sometime in the 18th or 17th century, I've read this story. The dates are all going to be wrong. You know, we got Newton. We're starting to build really sophisticated mathematical models of things, and this is spilling over into things like medicine. Like medicine pre-existed Newtonian, but it was butchery. It was crazy. It was parasympathetic magic. It was shamanism more than objective science. So, but of course, the progress in physics and then in chemistry, and the improvement in tools and experimentation, and humans have always been happy to cut each other's body parts off for various reasons. So we start to come up with this idea of objective causes for diseases. We still have no idea because we don't know about microorganisms. But people were starting to think in molecular terms. And so when they would see outbreaks, and I think the one I'm talking about is diphtheria or cholera in England. And there was a doctor tracing patients and outbreaks because the only thing they could do was quarantine and then whatever bullshit that they would, bloodletting or, mint or whatever crap, parasympathetic or homeopathic nonsense they would impose. But clearly they understood that these diseases were transmitted from person to person. And so, that was why you had the crosses on the doors. You would try to get rid of the dead because the dead bodies were So even though we didn't know at that point that they were due to these microorganisms, we did know there were noxious agents that we could localize objectively. And, back then when they were doing surgery, doctors didn't wash their hands. Like, this is terrifying to think of. They just didn't think about, they thought they were hygienic throwing their shit out the window. You got to think about this. Whatever you think you're doing that is naturally or factually hygienic, that's bullshit, because a lot of the things we do right now to be clean are actually hurting us. Like we use too many soaps. We use too many chemicals against life. Again, 99% of bacteria are benign or beneficial. And we've created the situation in which the 1%, which wouldn't have been that much of a detriment to our societies had we not inverted how we preyed as the top predator. So what this guy did, and of course no one believed him and people shut him down, and what he did is he narrowed down the source of an outbreak to this one well. He had the well shut down, and that stopped the outbreak. Now that was the beginning of the next steps, which was to understand that disease is caused by biology. It's caused by organisms we can't see. So in another experiment, this could have been Pasteur, it was around that time, they had this idea that people could see that bugs grew out of meat or other things, trees grew out of seeds. So they had this idea that in every living thing there was a germ, a model of that thing, a little model, a homunculus, and then it would just grow from that. But they also believed in terms of other things that life was spontaneously emerge out of nothing, out of clay. And I think it was Pasteur who built this glass tube with a really long, narrow spout. So he could still, with difficulty, get things in and out of the tube, but it would be almost impossible for anything in the air to find itself there. And they knew by then that boiling and so on could stop the growth of spoilage. and so on. Remember, we're coming up to start pasteurizing milk, Louis Pasteur. And so what he did is he sterilized this meat, built the jar around it so that there was air and nothing grew in the meat. And then he introduced a small amount from another bit of rotting meat, and then that meat started rotting. And so they now had an idea that disease was being caused by these organisms that were too small to see. And of course, at the same time, hey, the telescopes and the microscopes and Robert Hooke and the cellular theory of life. And, you can see how it all starts to fall together. But here's the problem. All these idiots not taking vaccines now don't know any of this. And this is shocking. Everybody should know this. If you don't know this, you shouldn't have an opinion on vaccines. And also, you should be forced to take your vaccines or go to jail or be fined. Let's talk about the problem with vaccines is that it solves a problem. That's a problem created by us living in close quarters with animals for so long and normalizing that behavior. And that is, of course, the perfect breeding ground for organisms which normally do not jump across species easily because of the stress of forcing these animals into living these unnatural lives. It makes them sicker, and it provides the breeding ground for microorganisms that can leap from animals to us or from us to animals. And what seems to be happening when these leaps take place is the animal it leaps to, because it hasn't been dealing with that organism, it has no template for dealing with it. And that's why a lot of times when we create the systems with animal husbandry and lack of sanitation and now it's like we get outbreaks all the time because there's too many gaps in our food safety system. Things have been deregulated. Like greed is causing people to turn a blind eye, and it's just a matter of time before we have another pandemic worse than the one that's still going on. And it's insane. It's insane to think that you would want to add measles back. So when we discovered these antibiotics, it might have been a lot better had we spent more time trying to undo the harms that would create. See, we created a problem and then found a technology and then abused that technology and failed to alter the behaviors to prevent it. This is what we've done with the vaccines now and why they're becoming ineffective. Because they've been given to people who have colds, because the doctors can't deal with the whiny, stupid people. Well, that's on the doctors. If people don't, you don't want to take antibiotics if you don't need them. When I had a nerve pinch, I also had been given Giardia by my stupid boss who wasn't shocking the well and had been sick himself for months and didn't go to a doctor and made us all sick. And then I took anti-inflammatories and I ended up losing my gut bacteria. So this is the problem, and this is where the suspicion comes. Yes, we have abused antibiotics. Yes, we have been wrong to claim that we could control all of the biological outcomes to prevent any unpleasant diseases for us. But in the background, it were the practices that led up to us finally discovering the causes of diseases that just allowed us to redouble and recompound the things that drive the creation of these diseases, when what we should have done is started moderating how we raised animals and how we formed cultures and how we behaved in cultures. But no, we had this magic bullet pill again. And so we could just stop worrying about disease. But of course, this is a fantasy too, because most people died in childhood even 100 years ago. Even in the 50s, my mother had terrible teeth because she didn't get enough calcium in her diet. She had rickets. And people had polio and on. And this is only the 1950s. This is my mother. She's still alive. But then my brother had whooping cough. He had the vaccine. It was awful. It might have killed him. I got chicken pox. Okay. So these things have only really been properly dealt with since the 60s and 70s. And now people are stepping into this new reality, and they have no knowledge of where we got from. And now they're listening to this bullshit online, this debunked shit. There's this anti-intellectualism. There is a worry that we should be worried about how science and technology have been exploited, abused, and used unwisely, because this is the piper we're going to pay. But the bottom line is, we're in for a penny and we're in for a pound here. What you need to understand about letting your child get measles by being an idiot and not taking this effective vaccine. Yes, some people will suffer from the vaccine, but way more are going to suffer from not taking it. And that's just life. These are contingent decisions, not necessary ones. So arguments about exceptions only prove the fact that some people are harmed by vaccines is itself a tautology. That many, many more are destroyed, and to the point of even causing civilization to collapse like it did for the bubonic plague. And I lost my train of thought there. But if you think that people getting measles is somehow correcting the problems with the abuse of antibiotics, like they shouldn't be feeding them to animals, right? So they feed them to animals when they're not sick, because they know they're going to get sick, being all forced together in these horrible cages and industrial milking machines. It's just horrible, and we've just worsened how we did things was bad enough, dumping shit out the window, not using human shit for fertilizer. We did all kinds of crazy stuff, but not at this industrial and cruel scale. So we've redoubled there. So I think a lot of the paranoia and the ignorant is kind of reacting to some kind of recognition that we have not used our technologies wisely, and we're setting ourselves up for disaster. But the final point I need you to get very clear: if you're a dumbass and you're going to not get your child vaccine, you're hurting everybody, and you're setting us up for worse when the next pandemic comes. Because the more diseases that are out there, the more society is undermined, and the more we create the perfect grounds for something like the plague again. And it's coming, don't worry. But if you let your child get the measles and your child lives, that disease will destroy their immune system for 2 to 3 years. This is the thing that nobody knew about back then. It's not that black and white. Every one of these things is a choice. It's a choice as to what behaviors we want to normalize to prevent illness, in combination with sane use of these very, it turns out, perishable magic bullets. So we can't stop using vaccines. We'll all die of things way worse than people did die of them before we figured all this stuff out. And so there's a bunch of lessons here. Treat antibiotics with kid gloves. Only take them if they're absolutely necessary, and there's a high probability of a serious bacterial infection. Stop using them in raising animals. But we ironically, we still need to correct the behaviors of these idiots who would endanger us all with their ignorance, hurting themselves and hurting their children, eyes wide open, believing nonsense. So there was the other thing. One thing I've realized is that in these ideas, I'm trying to bring different perspectives to. I'm trying to tease apart, get out of this superficial binary thinking, and look at these things. These are paradoxes. You cannot understand the problems in the moment if you don't understand the 10,000 to 80,000 year process by which we've got into this Chinese figure puzzle, where now we're making things worse in an effort to correct mistakes we made 10,000 years ago. Why don't we start correcting those mistakes we made 10,000 years ago, and then we wouldn't have all this anti-vaccine nonsense, because people would see the value, because these things would only deploy in those cases where these outcomes couldn't have been prevented. But most of the bad shit that's here for humans in terms of endemics and pandemics is caused by us, our bad diets, our abuse, our magic bullet thinking. All of these things are setting us up for a perfect storm. And I don't know, is it going to be all the satellites falling out of the sky, all the fish dying in the ocean, the polar vortex permanently relocating around? Like, you don't have a fucking clue. But I'll tell you right now, bad things are coming if we can't get out of this binary thinking, educate ourselves about the pros and cons in of disease management in the West in particular over the courses of history, and pick a fucking side that makes sense here. So the other area, the other parallel, the analog here is with what we've done with the birth control, which is also, I think, done more to hurt the cause of women and the reproductive ideals of not only our species and our genome, but of all the other animals we're meddling with. We're weakening ourselves and the genome as we rip out all the complexity that would allow it to recover from the damage that we're doing to it. It's just double down. So there's another instance. So a lot of this blowback, misogyny, it's because I think we made a mistake. We've made the pill too easy to access, and in the end, this is devalued intimacy. It's devalued the fact that, naturally speaking, sex is for reproduction, not for our pleasure. I don't want to deny people, but when we took away the real natural risks and devalued the implicit intention of sexual behavior, which is to reproduce a species, and started selling sex and making this about our identity. This is the same fucking problem we've gotten to the anti-vaccines. We have inverted the natural process of things to suit our own fucking hunger and sick need for control. And it's caused us to become these self-destructive, wallowing hyper animals. So I hope you see the things. We need to stop treating our technologies as if they're as effective as we'd like to think they are, because they're not. Because when we use them recklessly like we've had and unwisely, we end up subverting how nature actually works. And then we create the exact opposite of the problems that those things were created to solve, but that's only because those problems were created by prior decisions to subvert nature that we continue to accelerate and double down on. That are the real things that we need to mitigate, and that's the industrialization of food and sexuality. We're fucking batshit crazy. We need to face these things. But most of all, if you don't vaccinate your child, you're committing child abuse, is what I think, because you're going to predictably cause worse than measles. You're going to undermine your child's ability to have a healthy immune system in a world that is raging with the potential for a new pandemic. Think on what I've said.